A mother sold her only daughter to a stranger for 3 goats and a sack of grain. The girl cried the whole journey, believing her life was over. Years later, that same girl stood in a golden compound wearing a bride's beads. But nobody expected what her husband would place at her mother's feet. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale like this. Comment where you're watching from. Now let's begin this story of pain, patience, and unexpected glory. In a small village called Adaeze, where the harmattan wind carried dust through narrow paths and the rains sometimes forgot to fall, there lived a widow named Adaeze. She had once been a proud woman, married to a hardworking farmer who loved her and their only daughter Adaeze with his whole heart. But sickness came like a thief in the night and took him away, leaving Adaeze with debts she never knew existed and a daughter she could barely feed. Adaeze was 16 years old, quiet and gentle, with eyes that held more patience than most grown men could manage. She woke before the sun to fetch water, cooked what little food they had, and never once complained, even when her stomach growled louder than her own voice. She loved her mother deeply, and she believed, with the innocence only a child can have, that no matter how hard life became, they would face it together. But debt is a heavy thing. It does not care about love, it does not care about hunger or dignity. And in Adaeze there was a man named Adaeze, a moneylender whose name alone made grown men lower their eyes. Adaeze's late husband had borrowed from him during a difficult planting season, promising to repay after harvest. But the harvest failed, and then he died, and the debt remained, growing bigger each month like a shadow that refused to shrink. One evening, Adaeze came to Adaeze's hut himself. He did not shout, he did not need to. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it more frightening. He told her she had 3 days to pay everything she owed, or she would lose the small piece of land that was all she had left in this world. Adaeze fell to her knees and begged, but begging does not fill an empty purse. Adaeze simply turned and walked away, his sandals crunching against the dry earth, leaving Adaeze alone with her fear. That night, Adaeze did not sleep. She sat outside her hut, staring at the stars, trying to find an answer that did not exist. She thought of selling her chickens, her cooking pots, even the wrapper she wore to church on Sundays. None of it was enough. And then, in the quiet cruelty of desperation, a thought crept into her mind that she hated herself for even considering. There was a man in the village, a messenger for a wealthy trader named Chief Obira, who lived 2 villages away. Chief Obira was known to take in young girls from poor families, girls who would work in his household in exchange for money given to their families. Some called it help, others, in whispers, called it something closer to selling a child. Adaeze had always sworn she would never do such a thing. But that night, with Adaeze's threat hanging over her like a blade, she found herself walking to the messenger's house before the sun even rose. The deal was made quickly: 3 goats, a sack of grain, and enough money to clear the debt completely. In exchange, Adaeze would go to live in Chief Obira's household, to serve there until the debt of her service was considered paid. When Adaeze returned home, she could not look her daughter in the eye. Adaeze noticed the goats standing outside their hut, tied with rope, and the sack of grain leaning against the wall, and something cold settled in her stomach before her mother even opened her mouth to explain. When the truth finally came out, Adaeze did not scream. She did not cry immediately. She simply stood there, staring at her mother, waiting for her to say it was a joke, a mistake, anything other than what it was. But it was not a joke. And 2 days later, Adaeze found herself walking down the same dusty road her father used to walk to his farm, except this time she was walking away from everything she had ever known. Villagers watched from their doorways as she passed, some with pity in their eyes, others with the kind of judgment that stings worse than pity. Adaeze did not look back at her mother standing outside their hut. She could not bring herself to. The pain was too large, too heavy, too impossible to carry while still walking forward. The journey to Chief Obira's compound took most of the day. By the time Adaeze arrived, her feet were swollen and her throat was dry from crying silently the entire way. The compound was large, with high walls and a big wooden gate, nothing like the small mud huts of Adaeze. She was led inside by an old woman who worked as the head servant, a woman named Ronk, whose face was stern but not unkind. Adaeze was placed under the supervision of a man named Master Femi, a respected trader who managed much of Chief Obura's business. Master Femi was strict, expecting obedience and hard work, but he was not cruel. He did not beat the servants under his charge, though he demanded discipline from all of them. Adaeze quickly learned the rhythm of her new life, waking before dawn, sweeping the compound, washing clothes by the river, preparing meals, and retiring only when the last task was finished, often long after the moon had risen high in the sky. It was during those early weeks when loneliness pressed on her like a physical weight that Adaeze met a young man named Kwame. He worked in the same household, tending to the animals and helping with deliveries for Master Femi's trading business. Kwame was quiet, much like Adaeze, but there was something different about the way he carried himself. He worked hard, yes, but there was a calmness in him, a patience that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere obedience. The two of them found small moments to talk, moments stolen between chores. Kwame would help Adaeze carry heavy buckets of water when Ronk was not watching. Adaeze would save a piece of bread for him when meals were scarce. These small kindnesses became threads that wove them closer together, threads made stronger by shared hardship. Kwame never asked Adaeze about how she came to be a servant, and she never asked him either. In that place, everyone carried their own private pain, and there was an unspoken understanding not to pry too deeply into wounds still healing. What Adaeze did not know, what nobody in that household fully understood except for Master Femi himself, was that Kwame was not truly a servant at all. He was the son of a distant and powerful family, sent by his own father to live humbly among working people, to learn the value of labor and the weight of hardship before he would one day take his place as a leader among his people. It was an old tradition among some noble families, a way of ensuring their children did not grow up blind to the struggles of ordinary people. Master Femi had been sworn to secrecy, tasked with treating Kwame no differently than any other servant, no matter how difficult that became. Years passed this way. Adaeze grew from a frightened girl into a strong, thoughtful young woman. She never forgot her mother, though the memory carried a complicated mixture of love and anger, longing and resentment. Some nights she would lie awake wondering how her mother could have done such a thing, how 3 goats and a sack of grain could have been worth more than her own daughter's freedom. Other nights she would remember her mother's tears, her desperation, and she would find it in her heart to forgive, even if the forgiveness came slowly in small pieces like water wearing down a stone. Kwame, too, changed over those years. The boy who had once struggled with the weight of hidden identity grew into a man who understood, more deeply than most nobles ever could, what it meant to go hungry, to work with aching hands, to be looked down upon by those who considered themselves above him. And through it all, his feelings for Adaeze grew stronger, though he kept them carefully hidden, unsure of how she would react if she ever discovered who he truly was. The truth could not stay buried forever. Word eventually reached Kwame's family that he had grown into a man ready to return home and take on his responsibilities. Messengers arrived at Master Femi's compound, bowing respectfully to a young man they addressed with titles Adaeze had never heard used for him before. She stood frozen, watching as the truth unfolded in front of her, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted entirely. That evening, Kwame found her sitting alone near the compound's back wall, staring out at the darkening sky. He sat beside her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, he told her everything: his true identity, his family's traditions, the years he had spent hiding who he really was. Adaeze listened in silence, her mind spinning with confusion and fear. Had everything between them been real, or had she simply been a servant girl entertaining a nobleman's game? But Kwame's next words settled her fears before they could fully take root. He told her that everything he felt for her was real, more real than anything he had known in his life before coming to that compound. He told her that her worth was not defined by the goats and grain her mother had received, nor by the years she had spent as a servant. He told her he wanted to marry her properly with full honor as his equal, not as a master elevating a servant out of pity. Adaeze wept that night, tears that carried years of pain, confusion, hope, and disbelief all at once. She had spent so long believing she was something to be traded, something whose value could be measured in livestock and grain. And now, here was a man telling her she was worth more than any dowry, more than any family name, simply because of who she was. News of Quaim's intentions did not sit well with everyone in his family. When he returned home and announced he wished to marry a girl who had once been sold into servitude, his relatives were shaken. Some argued it would bring shame upon their family name. Others insisted he choose a wife from among the daughters of respected families, women whose backgrounds carried no scandal, no whispered stories of debt and desperation. But Quaim stood firm. He reminded his family of everything he had learned during his years working humbly among ordinary people, lessons about dignity, about the true measure of a person's character. He told them that Adaeze's past did not diminish her worth. If anything, it had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than any life of comfort ever could have. Slowly, though reluctantly at first, his family began to accept his decision, understanding that his mind would not be changed. Word was sent to Isiloko inviting Adaeze's mother to attend the wedding. Nneka received the message with a mixture of disbelief and shame so heavy it nearly kept her from going at all. In the years since selling her daughter, Nneka had lived with a guilt that never fully left her, a quiet ache that followed her through every task, every night, every prayer. She had heard rumors over the years that her daughter was alive and well, working in a respected household, but she had never dared to visit, believing Adaeze would never wish to see her again. When Nneka finally arrived at the grand compound where the wedding was to take place, she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Everything around her spoke of wealth and honor she had never known, drums already beginning to play in preparation, colorful fabrics being hung along the walls, the smell of freshly prepared food filling the air. She stood at the edge of the compound, unsure whether she even had the right to step further inside. It was Adaeze herself who came to meet her mother at the gate. For a long moment, the two women simply stood facing each other, years of unspoken pain hanging in the space between them. Nneka's eyes filled with tears and she began to apologize, her words tumbling out in broken pieces, apologies for the debt, for the goats, for every night Adaeze must have cried herself to sleep believing her mother had abandoned her to strangers. Adaeze listened quietly, and when her mother finished speaking, she reached out and took her hands. She told her mother that she had spent years being angry, years wondering how any mother could do what she had done. But she also told her that she now understood desperation in a way she never had as a young girl. She had seen how cruel the world could be to those without power, without money, without options. She told her mother that she forgave her not because what happened was right, but because holding onto that anger any longer would only continue the pain instead of ending it. The wedding day arrived under a bright sky, the kind of clear blue that seemed to bless the occasion itself. Drums echoed across the compound from early morning, calling relatives, friends, and villagers from near and far to witness the celebration. Adaeze was dressed in beautiful traditional attire, beads adorning her neck and wrists, her hair carefully braided and decorated by the women of the household who had come to love her over the years. Quaim stood tall in his own ceremonial clothing, pride and joy evident on his face as he watched his bride approach. Elders offered blessings, their voices rising and falling in traditional songs passed down through generations. Children danced between the legs of adults, laughter mixing with music in a celebration that seemed to shake the very ground with joy. Nneka sat among the honored guests, watching her daughter, tears streaming freely down her face, tears no longer of shame but of overwhelming gratitude and relief. As the ceremony reached its final stages, a hush fell over the crowd. It was customary in that region for a groom to present a special gift, something to honor the bride's family, a gesture of respect and gratitude for the woman they had raised. Guests leaned forward with curiosity, wondering what a man of Quaim's standing might offer. Quaim stood before the gathered crowd, and instead of turning toward Adaeze, he turned to face Nneka directly. The compound grew silent, every eye fixed on him, waiting. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the courtyard, explaining that this gift was not for his bride, but for the woman who had given her life, breath, and strength, even through the darkest of circumstances. He announced that he had already sent men to Isiloko weeks before the wedding. The debt that had once forced Nneka to make an impossible choice had long since been paid off, wiped away completely, but that was only the beginning. He had purchased back the very land Nneka had once feared losing, land that had belonged to her husband, land that held memories of a family once whole. And beyond that, he had commissioned the construction of a new home for her, sturdier and larger than the small hut she had lived in for years, a home built with dignity in mind. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the gathered guests, but Quaim was not finished. He turned to address Nneka directly, calling her by name, honoring her publicly as his mother-in-law, a woman deserving of respect rather than condemnation for choices made in desperate times. He told the crowd that circumstances, however painful, did not define a person's worth or character, and that Nneka's daughter had grown into the remarkable woman standing beside him precisely because of the strength she inherited from her mother. Nneka broke down completely, sobbing openly as villagers who had once whispered judgments about her now watched with newfound respect. She rose from her seat, unable to contain herself, and embraced her daughter and new son-in-law together, the three of them standing intertwined while drums continued their steady rhythm around them. The celebration that followed lasted long into the night, food and drink shared freely among all who attended, dancing continuing until the stars themselves seemed to join in the festivities. Adaeze, once a girl sold for 3 goats and a sack of grain, now stood as a woman honored, loved, and respected, her past transformed not into a source of shame but into a testament of resilience. As the night wound down and guests slowly began making their way home, Adaeze found a quiet moment with her mother beneath the light of a full moon. Nneka held her daughter's hands, expressing gratitude not just for forgiveness, but for the chance to witness her daughter's happiness after so many years of guilt and regret. Adaeze smiled softly, telling her mother that perhaps everything they had endured, all the pain and separation, had been necessary steps toward this very moment, though neither of them could have imagined such an outcome during those darkest days. This story reminds us that pain does not always remain pain forever. Circumstances that feel impossible to survive can, with time, patience, and unexpected grace, transform into something entirely different. Adaeze's journey from a sold servant girl to an honored bride teaches us that dignity cannot truly be taken away, no matter how desperate the circumstances that surround us. And sometimes, the very people who hurt us out of desperation are given a chance at redemption if only we allow room for forgiveness to grow. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful folktales. Tell us in the comments what you'd have done in Nneka's place. See you in the next story.